Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Rob Van de Veer. Rob, thanks for being here.
Great to be on your show, Chris. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to chat with you. I've been diving in a lot and trying to learn about AI and kind of upskill myself on this front. And your name quickly got on my radar as someone who's leading in this space as a vocal thought leader, leading on various efforts for various organizations, which I know we're going to talk about. But for folks that don't know you and haven't been following you quite yet, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're up to?
Yes. So my name is Rob van der Veer. I'm 55 years old. I did my master's in AI and then joined the AI industry in the beginning of the 90s. So I'm in the AI industry for more than 30 years now. I was a programmer, was a data scientist, a researcher, a hacker, a CTO, and a CEO for many years. I never want to do that again, but it was, I learned some great lessons. And 12 years ago, I made my move from the software industry to consultancy and started to work for a software improvement group. We help clients creating better software. And there I established new practices for security, for privacy, for AI. And in that period, we actually made the transition from focusing on consultancy to focusing on our product. So you could say that I'm in the software industry again. And at SIG, I play a role in management. I run innovation projects, I do client projects, and I try to make a difference in the field by sharing insights and expertise through publications and by taking part in standardization. And this is a task that I have been assigned to by SIG to do some thought leadership and share what we have learned. I contribute to the European AI Act. I was a lead author of a new ISO standard 5338 on AI engineering. I contribute to OWASP SAM, which is a secure software development maturity framework. Do research for ANISA. I'm in several ISO working groups for AI and security. I lead two OWASP projects. One is OpenCRE and one is the AI Exchange. I guess we're going to talk about that later, which basically open sources the AI security discussion. So that's me professionally. I also am an avid cyclist, road cyclist, but also mountain biking. And I love to make music.
Yeah, you're quite a man of many talents, and safe to say you've been around the AI space for quite a while. Although it feels like in the last year that the focus around AI in the cybersecurity industry in particular really heated up with ChatGPT and GPTs in general, LLMs. Folks really talking about the fears, risks, concerns around AI. As someone who's been in this, for quite a while, could you maybe clear up some of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, as we say in cyber? What are some of the most pressing risks you think we need to be concerned with when it comes to LLMs and AI and such? And what are some of the things that may sound fancy and exciting, but maybe aren't quite as much of a concern as we might think?
Yeah, there's plenty of concern, and rightfully so. I think purpose is one of the main concerns. The thing that you apply the AI system to. This is about think before you start, because you might be applying that AI model to something that can be very harmful. It may be illegal, and also the bigger the risk of harm, the more impact a security incident will have. If you have an AI system that controls a car, the security implications are much higher than in a more a general system. So that's purpose. And actually connected to that is controlling harm. So proper oversight, which is often lacking because, organizations, people tend to over-rely on models. AI models are always a tiny bit wrong, but it can be very wrong. That's important to realize, but they also can have been manipulated. And if you provide excessive agency to these models, if you allow them to send emails to everybody in your contact list, you're setting up yourself for trouble. So controlling harm is something that's often missing, and that's a big risk. We see, so from the organizations that we work with, in many cases that AI is treated like a lab thing. It's taking place in a separate room with separate people with, basically no policy. They have gotten the assignment, create this cool new AI system, in whatever way you feel necessary. But of course, they're building software that needs to be maintained, it needs to be controlled. They're building something that needs to be secure. And somehow the best practices in those areas are not often applied to those data science initiatives. So treating AI as an isolated thing is often a problem, resulting in a lack of security. We've looked at many AI systems and we saw that they have, on average, only 2% test code, where in the industry this is more than 40%. So a lot of best practices are missing. And this includes proper security of assets during development. So in particular, training data, causing training data to leak or to be poisoned, for example. And if it's a backdoor attack, that basically is impossible to detect later. So that's one of the key risks there when it comes to machine learning model attacks. Furthermore, the unawareness of data scientists, but also security professionals with machine learning attacks, like evasion attacks, model theft, model inversion. It's very complex to deal with these things. This is actually a cutting edge field where it's an arms race, mostly in academics, but those are real risks and many practitioners are not aware of them. And we're catching up with that, but we're not succeeding in making everybody aware of it. Then there's supply chain complexity. There are many new platforms, components, and frameworks, and they have vulnerabilities because it's IT, right? But there are many new ones, so this particularly affects AI. There are also pre-trained models in the supply chain that are reused and obtained externally and present a risk. They can have been manipulated, just like external data sets can have been poisoned by others. So complexity in the supply chain. And last but not least, large language models, they have specific, or Gen AI if you want, risks like prompt injection and something that's often overlooked, confidentiality issues around retrieval augmented generation. So this means that the most dominant architecture for large language models is where you build a large prompt with a question and a lot of context. And in this context, there can be many confidentiality issues. And because this goes into the cloud, this presents a large risk. So that about sums it up.
Yeah, quite a few things to be concerned about. You said a few things that I want to kind of pull the thread on and ask additional questions of you real quick here. One is that you talked about supply chain concerns, and I know there's been a bit of an evolution or some growth in terms of both kind of vendor AI platforms and products and services, and as well as kind of a growth and expansion in the open source ecosystem around different models and platforms and tools that people can use. What are some unique considerations of whether someone goes the proprietary vendor route or leans into the open source? Each of those have kind of unique considerations around the supply chain aspect and the security aspect, for example.
Yeah, so we've learned from non-AI systems that whether you're supplying obtaining something from an external vendor or something from open source, they both are concerns. So you need to do your proper provenance and pedigree, your dependency management. It's the same as with software development in general. AI has, of course, a lot of new frameworks, a lot of new products, and I think that extra care needs to be taken in verifying the security of it and being careful with going ahead with many of these products, whether they are open source or from a vendor, because there's a lot of speed in the industry currently, and that's not helping the security risks. But apart from using these components, there are also pre-trained models and training data that is obtained externally that adds to the complexity of the supply chain. So yeah, it's something to be really careful about.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you additionally is like you used a phrase, and I may have it slightly wrong, but I think you used the phrase "think before you start," and that's kind of taking a nod to things like threat modeling and kind of thinking through your business use case and justification for embracing these technologies and services and platforms and things like that. But I think there's a bit of industry fervor around this, in the sense that we need to start using this because everyone else is using it. There's a hype around it, right? These organizations are quickly adopting it just because they see everyone else using it, or they think they need to do it to keep pace with business peers or competitors, for example. How do you get the business, for example, or if you're a security practitioner, how do you communicate with the business to get them to maybe take that strategic pause and think through their use cases and security risks and considerations, because there is that bit of a hype about it that people feel like they need to start using it now to keep pace.
Yeah. So indeed, there is a sort of a Me Too effect where organizations want to go ahead with AI because they are curious. They don't want to sort of miss any opportunities. And at the same time, that's dangerous because they're going to do something that is new, for which they require to have new people on the payroll, such as data scientists. They're going to be dealing with new risks. And I think the new ISO publication, the 42001, which is about AI governance or AI, it's actually an AI management system, really provides a nice guidance in how to think before you start, how to consider all those responsible AI risks before you go ahead, and not just to set up a great design so you can take the next step, but also to maybe at some point reconsider the whole idea. So maybe we're sort of creating a problem here, and we shouldn't apply AI because we want to apply AI, and think again. Next to the 42001 is the 5338. I think I mentioned it already. It's about software engineering lifecycle for AI systems. It's also an ISO standards. It's just been released, and it helps organizations to take into account the additional issues that they will face when they start to build AI systems, like, for example, the predictability problems with AI projects. And you need a lot of experimentation, and things may get out of hand. So if you're on a tight budget, maybe you should think again before you start with AI. So those would be my my takeaways.
And one last additional question on that topic before we move on to some other areas is, you talked about I think you kind of called it a false sense of security. People get a false sense of security using these tools that, hey, if the AI said it, it must be right. Or, and I've read some studies, I'm not going to name vendors per se, but, there was an interesting study around code generation tools that are using AI and developers embracing these tools. Using them to quickly develop code. And, obviously developers are incentivized by, burning down backlogs, getting feature releases out there, speed to market, things like that. And again, there's that kind of pressure to keep pace with competitors or even internal development peers in your organization. How do you kind of advise, developers or folks using it for things like code generation to maybe take a pause or at least give a second look to some of the code before just trusting whatever the platform throws at you?
Yeah, so my advice would be to use these systems and to get acquainted with them and to let them make you more productive in your work. Large language models are making us more productive. They're making you more productive, Chris. I suspect making me more productive when I code, when I write articles. It helps. It's important at the same time to look at some of the implications that may not be super obvious from the get-go. Like, for example, that once you create code using generative AI, you are the owner of that code and you need to maintain it. So you need to be able to change it, to understand it, and to check it. And you should check it. You're not maintaining the prompt that you typed in to get the code. That code is now something that you own and that you are responsible for. This means that you need to, as a programmer, to review that code and understand it and check it. But the problem is, code review of somebody else's code actually requires more skill than writing the code yourself. That might sound like a paradox, but it is a paradox, and it's a problem because if people sort of overlook this, they will think, okay, so I generated this. Well, I put it in production. But you actually need to check it and probably need a senior engineer to review your code if you're not a senior engineer yourself, because it may be too difficult for you. And this creates an incentive for senior engineers to do all the work themselves. Because we're going to a situation where the senior engineers who already were 10 times more productive than the junior engineers are becoming 100 times more productive because of generative AI. and the junior engineers are creating code that they can't review, for which they need the senior engineers. This creates a big gap, and I find it hard to predict how we're going to solve this, but we need to be aware of it and address that issue, and then it will be a great multiplier of productivity.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. Is there's the multiplier effect of productivity, but you kind of point to the fact that there could be a bottleneck impact in terms of senior, developers and engineers need to kind of be more involved to make sure that whatever the tools are generating and producing for maybe junior peers is good to be moved to a production environment, or has a second look, or has a second set of eyes on it. Something to keep in mind for sure. And then, another thing I want to talk about is we talked about speed to adopt these tools, speed to market, some of the things that are driving this, the hype around it. We're actually seeing governments move relatively quickly to try to kind of regulate, or at least put some, structure and governance and guardrails around, using AI. Most notably, the EU AI Act that you talked about that you've been involved in. We obviously saw an AI executive order here in the United States. Why do you think it's so critical that governments move so quickly here? And what do you think is driving that from there? And given that, governments do tend to be laggards in some cases and kind of lag behind technology and regulating, new evolving technologies.
Yeah, so if you look at the European AI Act, it seems like a response to sort of the generative AI revolution. But in fact, the AI Act was already in the making long before, the big rise of Gen AI, because there were concerns, and rightfully so, about AI in general. But it's great that it's sort of getting towards an end result, and now that we are all, worried about, so how are we going to regulate this? So the timing of the AI Act is actually great. But it was not per se a quick response, because none of these things, at least not in Europe, are quick, especially because we have to do this all in concordance with the many nations that we have here. So yeah, it's indeed critical for governments to regulate technology, to protect individuals from harm, like the privacy regulations have done. This is about sort of an asymmetry of stakes. If a company leaks personal data, it may be bad for its reputation, but the individuals, they suffer the most. And privacy regulation sort of restores this asymmetry, restores the balance by introducing a penalty for the company. And the same goes for AI. It protects sort of the individuals that can be harmed. And furthermore, it's of course important to establish a consensus, so there's a shared understanding of what is the duty of care, and government regulations can drive this and are driving this to get more towards harmonized standards that everybody can use.
Yeah, I think the harmonization is critical. We also saw the Office of National Cyber Director kind of release some stuff here in the United States around regulatory harmonization and how important it is. And that goes beyond AI, but cybersecurity and security more broadly of software and digital systems. One thing I want to ask you about is there obviously there's like a longstanding debate of regulation stifling innovation and economic growth and things like that. In contrast against those with more rigorous privacy and security concerns. And where do you fall between that camp, and how do you think we can thread that needle of regulating these emerging technologies like AI while still allowing innovation, economic prosperity, uses for national security purposes, etc.
Yeah. Well, one thing is for sure: regulations are going to hinder AI potential by definition, because the idea is to effectively hinder AI potential where we believe it would be wrong to apply it, right? But of course, for all those cases that are not harmful, we don't want to stifle innovation caused by the overhead of governance, risk, and compliance. Now, the European AI Act wants to minimize this problem by providing, for example, the option for self-assessment, and providing regulatory sandboxes where innovative new ideas, new initiatives can work together with the regulator in a sandbox to see where the issues are without being concerned about breaking any laws. So trying to minimize the assurance effort that is needed, and regulatory sandboxes are the controls to not stifle innovation. But given the risks, I believe it is essential to make a good effort in carefully looking at what you're doing, what you're building, or let others have a look. So yeah, it may seem like a burden, like privacy regulation sometimes is, but it's for a good cause.
Yeah, that makes sense. And before we move on from the regulation topic, I'm curious your perspective. As I watch kind of the different approaches, obviously in the United States, we've taken a much more voluntary framework type of approach where, recommendations, best practices, voluntary, recommendations and guidance are being put out. And where in the EU, there's a lot of that too, but there's also a bit of a more firm requirement approach in some cases, like outright banning certain use cases and things like that. What do you think is the right approach, or is there a right approach, or what do you think of the two different approaches we kind of see evolving?
Yeah, that's a tough question for me. So in Europe, certain applications indeed are simply forbidden, like large scale biometrics, like for example face recognition from cameras in the public areas. But there are still exceptions to those for certain law enforcement applications. It will still remain possible. There's not many forbidden applications. It's a few of them, like for example, social scoring is also forbidden. For the rest, there is a list of use cases, application areas that are considered high risks. Those are not forbidden, but they require a certain assurance. So in that sense, there's not a large difference when it comes to setting strict boundaries between US and EU regulation, as far as I know.
Yeah, that's a good point. And honestly, from my digging into the EU AI Act, I think it's very the way it approaches it is very comprehensive and coherent in terms of outright banning use cases that have blatant privacy and freedom concerns for citizens, but also putting governance and guardrails around high risk use cases, but still allowing them to be used just with that additional oversight and governance, which I think is critical too. So I want to move on a little bit here. You've talked about some of your involvement in different organizations like OWASP, for example. I want to talk to you about the OWASP AI Exchange. I came across that, and honestly, it's been one of the most comprehensive and valuable resources I found on educating myself around AI risks and security considerations. Can you tell us a bit about that project, where people can learn more and what exactly the intent of the project was?
Yes. So people can find it at owaspai.org. And I started an OWASP project called the AI Security and Privacy Guide in 2022 in order to share the research that we did at Software Improvement Group and to let others join in. And this worked out nicely, and it resulted in a guide that was relatively high level. Later, I was part of the Sensenelic Workgroup 1. We were tasked with security standardization for the AI Act in Europe. And we observed two things. This is a very complex and cutting-edge topic for which you need a range of experts across disciplines. So you need a lot of experts. And two, we observed that there are many initiatives for providing AI security guidance. And those initiatives were not aligning with each other on terminology and principles, and each had their own focus and scope. So the intent of each of the initiative was great, but it was leading to sort of proliferation. So then I proposed to open source this whole this global AI security discussion, and started the OWASP AI Exchange, which is basically a document, a markdown document, where experts around the world can contribute on identifying AI security threats and controls. We got a lot of positive response from this idea, and now we have a whole group of experts contributing to the exchange, leading to a comprehensive overview of AI security threats and controls. And I aligned with Sensenelic, and we made the text copyright free, so you can use the content of the AI exchange without even attributing OWASP or any expert, because we found this sort of altruistic approach is the only way to allow standard makers to use our work. Otherwise, they would rather reinvent the wheel, and that's something that we want to help stop. And it was used, the content of the AI exchange was used verbatim by Sensenelic to work on. and it's also used as input to ISO 27090, which is the upcoming ISO standard on AI security. It's expected to be released in 2025. So that's the AI exchange in a nutshell.
Yeah, so I definitely recommend for folks tuning in and listening to the conversation here, definitely check it out if you haven't already. It's incredibly comprehensive in terms of security risks and considerations. And if you're a security practitioner like myself and just trying to educate yourself on what you should be thinking about when you're working with organizations who are using these technologies and platforms, it's a great resource. And it's awesome to hear that you guys put it out there with no kind of copyright requirements or things like that, because it's great to avoid reinventing the wheel, as you talked about. And it kind of leads me to my next question for you is, I've done a lot of work throughout my career in terms of compliance, whether it's SOC 2, FedRAMP, CMMC is evolving here in the United States. We have NIST risk management framework, 853, and there's obviously international standards, EU standards. There's a lot of overlapping and duplicative compliance frameworks that industry is often wrestling with. Another effort you've been involved in that caught my attention was OpenCRE. Can you tell us a bit about that and what exactly that does?
Yes. Yeah, so indeed, I think we can all agree that there are many standards, which is great, but it's hard to find what you need. When you're building something, you want to know how to test it. You want to know what regulations it relates to. All these things are somehow connected to each other. And we created that connection with OpenCRE. Started 4 years ago, also as a spin-off from an OWASP project. I lead it together with a Greek friend, Spiros Chastratos. And by now it's become a quite popular platform to sort of unlock the landscape of security standards, because it basically is a catalog of common security requirements, because all these standards, they mostly talk about the same things, but in different ways. Some are more for testers, some are more for developers, some go more into depth about cryptography, others go more about risk management. Each has their own scope, so you want to link them together to provide great reference. And so we link all these requirements to the corresponding common requirement in OpenCRE, standards from ISO, MITRE, NIST, OWASP, Cloud Security Alliance, etc. And you can find it at opencre.org indeed. It's basically a single resource that allows access to all other security resources, allowing you to refer, if you want to refer people to more information about, for example, session token generation. You will see a white paper from NIST on random number generation. You will see a testing guide from OWASP, how to penetrate this. You will see a selection of rules from a dynamic test tool that you can use to verify it. And this way, standard makers or authors of policies can easily refer their readers to the key information and only focus what is specific for what they're writing. So that's for referring. But because we have all those standards in one resource, we have other ways to unlock it. We can do map analysis. So we can map an ISO standard to a NIST standard. And you quickly, this very much helps with compliance tasks. You can, of course, browse, you can search, and you can chat, because we actually created the world's first security chatbot, OpenCRE Chat, and it uses all the standards that we have as the primary input to answer your security question. So this means that you will get a more reliable answer, and you will get a reference to the corresponding standard that will help you answer your question. I'm very proud of OpenCRE. And we're increasingly adopting new standards. Check it out.
Yeah, definitely recommend folks give it a look. As he talked about, there's obviously many evolving, emerging, and existing compliance frameworks and standards that we need to be familiar with as a security practitioner, as well as if you're a vendor and you're being asked questions, you've already met one compliance framework, you can cross-map those control frameworks, see where controls you've already met from one framework may be able to map to another. It can help with obviously answering security questionnaires that we all love so much and things like that. There's a lot of different unique use cases I think that it brings value to, so definitely check out opencre.org. One question I wanted to ask you that we ask, every guest here is, what does the term cyber resiliency mean to you?
So resilience means that not per se you are perfectly protected against any attack. Resilience means well, to some level you are protected against attacks, but also that the implications of the attack are minimized. This means, and this is often overlooked, that cyber resilience is not just about protecting and putting a wall there, but also making sure that there's not a lot of things that you can loot from the castle, so to speak. Minimizing data, making sure that you are quickly able to detect what's going on and respond to that. So minimizing impact, minimizing time to respond, apart from building a wall, are a super important element of cyber resilience. And the same goes for AI, where you want to have oversight just in case things go wrong, because things will go wrong. Zero trust very much applies to AI systems as well, including the behavior of AI models, not just because they are imperfect by design. They make estimates, so they can misinterpret the voice command that you said and do something completely different. So you want to have oversight in place, etc. But also because they can have been manipulated. So that zero trust approach to software in general needs to be applied to AI models as well. And then you have a cyber resilient AI system.
I love it. I love the AI kind of blended flavor you added in there too, as well, given your area of expertise and focus. For folks that tuned in, we covered a lot of great ground, whether it's regulating AI, some of the key risks and considerations, vendor products versus open source AI systems. We talked about open OWASP AI exchange, open CRE for compliance framework mapping and aggregation and enrichment. That said, thanks so much for tuning in, and Rob, thanks for joining us today.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you, Chris, and goodbye, everybody.